Hey, welcome back everyone to this live session. I will be talking about the new MtoA release, which was released, I think, a few days back, 3 days ago, something like that. It features some nice new tools, some new shader updates, and a lot of bug fixes. I will be just waiting a bit, and I will set up the scene a bit more, and then I'll start, I guess, in 5 minutes or something when more people are around. So hey, welcome already. You guys, I'll just be waiting a few more times, and then we can go and start the session. So hey, welcome already. You guys. Whoa. I'm just tweeting about it that I'm live, so maybe a few more people join. I'll just open the thumbnail quickly. Oh, never mind. I'll just start setting up the session a bit more. So that's my main camera. Not this one. This one. I'll need to hide them for now. So I'll just setting up this scene a bit more and adding a few lights to this to make it a bit more interesting. And I think 5 past or maybe 10 past, I'll get started. So the first thing, I'll import a model, or I create the sphere quickly. So you feel free to ask any questions so far. So it's, if you want to, anything. Okay, let's just import something. Import. The color of the groups, you can change them. I'll show you in a second. Let me just import something. Fauna, what do I have? Food. What do we have? A cherry, maybe? Raspberry. I'm just looking for something interesting to model. Maybe just the apple half. That's maybe okay, or the full apple. So I want to show you guys the new volume rendering, which is very awesome. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that could work, I guess. So center, pivots, huge apple. Shouldn't be that big. I guess 1 is fine. Okay, 0.1. Okay. So to change a color in the groups is pretty straightforward. You just select a group or whatever. I think you can even do this with shapes. And then you go into the attribute editor. And in display, you have the option to have an outliner color. So you can set the color here and then you can just toggle it on or off. That's how I set the colors. I'm not sure what AOVs they changed. Let me see. They shouldn't have changed anything. It's just you can use LPEs, light path expressions, to create your custom ones. Got the built-in ones. So no, they added code, which is cool. Direct, indirects, direct, indirects, direct, indirect. So these are the ones which you most of the time will be using. You can, for transmission, most cases just transmission is fine. And if you plus all of these together in your compositing software, you get the beauty render. That should be it. Nothing too crazy. And you should maybe have also the diffuse, the diffuse albedo if you want to do some raw light extraction. But these should be it. No, there is no crypto matte AOV per se. There is just the option to build in, like, add custom AOVs. Wait, where did I read that? Bug fixes, features. There it is. Introducing AOV shaders, so you can actually plug in a custom third-party shader into an AOV shader, which then extracts or writes into a different AOV. So you can do that kind of thing. I didn't check it out just yet. Let's see if I can find it. If it's just called AOV shader, I don't think so. I don't know. I did not look into that so far. Okay, it's 5 past now. So the first thing, which I think is pretty cool, is that you can render volumes now inside of like geometry as volumes. So first I need to create a light. Let's just use a simple area light, and let's position that. And there we go. Frame this guy. Okay. The apple is floating, which is, I guess, okay for volume. So I'm just positioning the light here, making this a bit bigger, something like that. And let's just see how it works out if I render now without any special things. Right, save as. Let's just do desktop quickly. Live session, just. Okay, let me just read the comments quickly. Okay, so the first question is if it's too late to join 3D, like with 23. I don't think so. It's never too late. Like colleagues of mine, they are very old, like let's say 40, 45, and they're still in the industry and they're still very good. So I think if you spend some time learning things, you can get there as well. Like you can learn all this fancy stuff in a year or something. So I think it's never too late to join this. And because new technology is evolving so fast, there's always time to adapt for things. So I would encourage you actually to just do it. Let's just change this guy. Let's change the resolution, 50%. Remove normalize, and there we have a floating apple. That's cool, right? So the other question was regarding specular. Yes, the problem is if you just output specular, it's indirect and direct combined, and you cannot extract them. So if you want to treat indirect or direct separately, there is no way to do it if you just output the specular. So what I always do, I just output indirect and direct, and if you plus them together, you get specular. But if you don't, you have the separate control. LPEs, light path expressions. I'm not sure if that's a bit too advanced for most of the people, but I can go over that in a tutorial, I guess, if it's not too crazy. So, anyways, we'll start now with this new feature which they have announced. This guy. Volumes can now be used inside Polymesh. Volumes can now be used inside a poly. I think that's the one I was talking about. So, anyways, you can render geometry now right inside of Arnold without having VDBs. So to do that, you select your object, the shape object like this, and you go to Arnold tab, and at the bottom you have volume attributes now, which is new, and then you need to increase the step size like this, like some value, and volume padding if you have displacement as well. And then what you got to do, you need to assign a volume shader, which is actually not showing up if you do assign new material. It's not in here. I could not find it, so that's something they need to add. But it is in here. AI standard volume shader. That's the guy. and you just assign this to your geometry. And let's see if this did work. There we go. So now you're actually rendering a volume, and you can do pretty cool things with that. Like you can add displacement, and then you get like a broken up volume. So if I increase the intensity of the light source now, and let's just bring it a bit closer, you can actually see some really interesting lighting now. Let's just see a bit more. There is no reflection linking, definitely not. And it's not physically accurate. I know it sometimes it's cool to be able to do that, but Arnold is the philosophy of them is not to have these kind of customizations. So it's a physical renderer, and they wanted to be treated as one. So you don't have the options to do proper light linking. I mean reflection linking or shadow linking. So that's nothing which I think will be added anytime soon. Let's just go a bit smaller. So this is now the volume rendering, and obviously in the shader you have a few more options to change the density and a few more things. So if I reduce the density, you can see it gets lighter. I don't know, lots of things. You can change the scatter color. That's a default volume shader. And the cool thing now about this, you can actually plug in a displacement map into this guy. So if I would just select a AI noise and connect it to the displacement, AI noise, I just add a bit more distortion, and might be that we need to increase the frequency a bit. So let's just see what we get now. So no change so far. The thing is, we need to change the volume padding and the volume attributes a bit. Let's just try 10 and restart. We don't see anything just yet, I think. This might be a small... No, there's something happening now. So if I increase the shader... Excuse me. I'm just reading the comments quickly. Yeah, sure. You can do that with an animated character as well. It just needs to be... You just need to set those attributes, and you should be fine to do that as well. So let's just see if we can work with the displacement a bit. If I change the scale to be, I don't know, maybe 10. Let's see what we get now. It's hard to see. It actually should do something. If I select this. Oh, the noise is very small. Let's just go 0.1. 0.1. That's better. And let's try to pref and make it even smaller. Okay, let's see what we get now. If actually something changes. Unfortunately, I don't see anything. In my test before, it was working exactly like that. So it might be that we just have different settings. Let's just update again. Nothing going on. Let's try the step size again on the apple. Sorry, on the apple. Can't select it. What is if I reduce this guy? It's hard to see anything at all. We should see some... Well, there is something on the surface. You can see it very subtly that there is something going on. Something is breaking up the surface. Maybe volume padding is not high enough. Yeah, I don't know. It's not a dramatic effect as I would expect it to. So let's just see what the comments. Let's just position this guy here. Okay, so let's see what I can read here. Yes, animated characters. Rotate the light is pretty simple. You just rotate the transform. Yeah, you can, but it's not. It depends. If you use an Maya file node and you use an, I think, EXR or HDR file, it's visible in the viewport. You put an AL noise. I don't have AL. AL surface doesn't work with Arnold 5. I can try to use a Maya noise, but it does work actually. The render view, sure, I can make that bigger. It's just for me hard to move then, but anyways, I'll just make it a bit bigger. 50%. There, it's a bit bigger. Okay, AI standard or AL surface. Like, there's no sense to use AL surface anymore because all those nice features from AL surface are now in AI standard shader as well. So there's no big point in using AL stuff anymore unless the guy Anders Langlands will publish new shaders, which I know he will, and maybe then. So okay, let's show you the other new thing, which is the AI standard surface shader. It's got a few new features which are pretty cool. For that to work, I need to import an HDR file first and disable the volume stuff, which I just enabled down here. So both to 0. So this should be now a default AI standard shader. And let's just load in a light, Skydome light, and change the... Oh, I can actually show you how to make it visible in the viewport, I think. Let's just try that. 2D textures, file node, and load in a map. Let's just go with Garage. Let's see if we can view this now. Yeah, there it goes. So if you use a Maya file node, you can actually see it in the viewport. So that's my HDR file. Simple Garage. And if you want to rotate it, you select the light and you rotate the light and you rotate the HDR, as simple as that. Okay, so let's just for now disable the lights and start the render and see what we get. Takes a while to translate the light now. Okay, so this is now what we got. So it's important with the new Arnold also, if you have HDR files, make sure that your lights are in the proper format. So it needs to be in RAW. This color space needs to be RAW. If it's not RAW, if it's sRGB or something else, and you use EXR or HDR files, it gets blown out. I think that's what some people don't know about. You can change the default behavior in your preferences. Right here, if you go to color management, and you can create default rules, and I just changed the default rule to always be raw. So everything which is an input is be set to raw automatically, and that's how I work. And if most times I know if a texture is sRGB, and I just switch that single texture manually. Okay, so let's go back to the Apple, and I want to show you the new features in that shader. Okay, so the first feature is that you have now presets on your values. So for instance, if you want to have different IOR values for, let's say, plastic, you can just click on this where you see those 3 lines, click on that and you get a drop down. It's like AL surface. They added these features from there. So I'm just hiding the backplate quickly so it's a bit more efficient. Changing the values to 2. Okay. Okay, so back to the shader. So that's the one thing, you can do that. And the other cool thing is, if you, let's say you have a metal, let's just create a chrome or something like that. This is now my rough chrome shader. And you want to have this thin film effect, right? Thin film is something, if you got a surface, then you got some interference layer, and then you got a clear coat. So, and in between those 2 layers, it's called a thin film. That's what you see on the ocean when oil has been dripped on the water, or if it's a rainy day and you check the streets and you see these purple puddles on the street. That's, or like a soap bubble, that's all thin film stuff. And it's now built in, so they deprecated the shader. There was a thin film shader and they deprecated that one now. And it's now inside of the AI standard shader right below emission. And you can just enable that and you can directly see what's going on here. That you see there is this interference level on there. Yeah, it might not be as visible. That's because we have a shiny surface. But you can see there's something going on here. Now let's just change the color space for Rec 709. Okay, so what you can do now is you can actually connect a map to, I'm not so sure if I'm still running here. There, I think I am. So what you can do, you can actually connect a thickness map to the thin film stuff to get more variation. So let's try that. If I connect a, what else? Where is it? We can just use a noise for now. Connect the out color red to the thickness of the thin film. There we go. And now we have to use values like you can, the default values that go from 0 to 1. So we want a thickness which goes from, let's say, 400 to 1000. So you go to the value and you enter those values right here, 400 and then to 1000. And you see apparently nothing. Let's just see. I think the scale is off. So let's just see what scale we have. Obviously it's now not working because it's way too high. Let's just go for 1. So this is my scale currently. So let's first set the scale to be 0.1 maybe. Yeah, let's add some distortion, something like that. Let's go even lower to 5. Okay, so I'm just setting up a small noise pattern, like something like this. And let's just see if we can get this to work now. If I go back up to 800, there we go. Now we see something. And 400, that's better. So now you can actually see that there is some interference right on the surface. Yes, it gives the iridescence, and that is a thin film. On the beetle bugs, it's called iridescence or thin film. It's all kind of the same. They have like a small coating right in between the objects. So you can see now that there is this interference happening, and obviously you can change the IOR to have a different effect on it. You can see what's going on here. You can animate this texture if you want to. So there are lots of things you can do. And if you want to create a soap bubble, let's just do that quickly. So this is now my simple dielectric, I guess, like this. And if I want to make it transparent, I would go to the Apple, change my transmission to be on, no roughness, and I would change on the geometry to thin walled. And I think I need to do the opaque switch. Let's just see how this soap bubble looks like now. Yeah, I guess it's way too shiny. The IOR is way too high. It should be something about water. And I guess in general, it's just the HDR is pretty crazy. But you can see the effect if I go down here. Or I just make the HDR invisible. Wow, it's crazy. I'm just faking this a bit now. But you can see the effect. So you get this kind of water bubbly effect. The other question, should the base weight always be 1? It's a good question. It depends. In most cases, I'll just set it to 1. But it's I guess preference. I'll show you the difference quickly. So let me just reset all this stuff. Thin film transmission is off. There we go. So you can either have a weight of 1 and then you just control everything with the color, or you have like a white color and you just reduce the weight. So for me it's a bit counterintuitive to use the weight for setting values, so I just keep this to 1 and then I control everything with the color. I know, I guess it's preference. Yeah, all my live streams go automatically up to YouTube, so they are uploaded. What else is there? There's this code now. They all have, everywhere where you see those 3 lines, it's a preset. Subsurface, nothing changed here. So, and the next cool thing about the render view is, first of all these settings which you set are stored in Maya preferences. So it's not on the scene anymore. It's when you do a change here, it saves it to the preferences. And you also have the option to save the image, like different settings here. So you can have options how these images are being saved. And a very cool, nice feature is this new button here, which is the same as the isolate selected, which you would find in the debug shading menu. This at the bottom here, the isolate selected, it's this button here. So they moved it out of the menu. And it has a hotkey, which is very nice. So I can actually press S when the view is active and it gets enabled. And then I can just select the objects and only those get rendered. So if I have a shader connected or a map, I can just go there, select it, and select it here at the bottom, and then it's the map which is being selected here. So you can see now that it's only the noise now being selected. And if I press S again, it's toggled off, and then it's the default render again. What else? Let me just see what else there was. Thin film, that's something. Oh, indirect clamp, which is nice. And that, okay. So the other thing is they added indirect clamp, which was a request. It is helpful if you have lots of shiny objects like reflections, refractions, and you want to reduce the noise a bit. So there's an option in clamping now to clamp the indirects, which is only clamping indirect values, so it's not affecting the direct stuff. But it will overall reduce the light intensity at some point. So if you clamp at 1, for the directs, you should not see any difference, but it should dramatically reduce the noise. But a value of 1 is way too low. So you need to try to find a great mix between those values. If it sacrifices your image, it's set too low, but it will definitely reduce fireflies, and that's a very helpful feature. And we use that in production quite a bit to quickly clean up noise and have good results still. You also need to, for the HDR questions, you also need to make sure that TX files are regenerated. So delete all the TX files, set it to raw, and then regenerate those TX files. Okay, what else? Code is new, we talked about that. Presets, talked about that. Strength, yeah, we can talk about that. That's all the new features. Settings are there. That's a talk. That's the new button. Run your camera displays. Okay, so what was that now? Yeah, there's now a normal map, AI normal map, where they added a strength parameter, which is helpful. AI normal map. So you have now strength right here to control the effect of the bump or the normal. Yeah, that's kind of that. Let's see if I think of something else which is interesting. So what was the question? Oh, the texture, emissive texture was a question, I guess. So let's just try something. I did not test this beforehand, so it might fail, but it might also work. So let's just see what we get here. So I create a box, which might be my VDB volume box, but this is just my normal fluid container, which will be now rendered as a volume. So I add the step size to maybe 5, and I assign a volume shader. Clean this mess up here, and there it is. So assign this guy. Standard volume, remove the displacement, density, okay, this is white. Now we should have a volume body. If I have a light source, which I don't have, there it is. View panes. Okay, so that's my light container. It's not scattering as much because the density is, I guess, way too high. So let me change the density a bit. Really low. Okay, so now we've got this volume container, right? So if I put in a sphere in the center, you can see the sphere and you can see the nice volumetric shadow, right? That's pretty awesome already. If I zoom in a bit, make this a bit brighter for you guys. you can see that the sphere here is blocking the volumetrics, and I can actually hide the volume cube now in the viewport. If you go to the shape and you have the option to object display to make LOD off, then it's just off in the viewport, but it still renders. So that's the one thing. So the question was now, how do you, I think, have emissive textures and a volume? I guess that was a question. So let's try that. So if I hide the light, which should be black, everything, I save quickly. I assign a new shader, favorites, then it's surface shader. I go to, I think I disable specs and base. And I go to emission, increase the weight. Interesting, it's not actually contributing. So either this needs to be fixed still, or I need to find a checkbox somewhere. Interesting. So maybe it's not working with the current setup because this was just introduced. Or maybe I need to update scene. No. So this was just introduced. So it's fairly possible that this is not yet supported. That emission affects the volume box. It's possible. I'm not so sure. That's on. So the other thing which you can do is just convert this guy to a mesh light, and that should be working. And they actually increased or like made the mesh light so much better, like cleaner and faster. So we can actually try that as well. Lights, mesh light. So this is now a mesh light. You can show the original mesh if you want. And let's try this, render. And there we go. So this is now the mesh light being rendered inside the volume. And obviously you can make the light visible like this. So this is kind of the same effect. And you can plug in a texture in the intensity if you want to, or in the color. So it's either off or on. So it's kind of the same effect, which you can try to do. And then you obviously have the exposure, and you can see this is now a glowing... sorry about that. So this is now a glowing sphere inside this volume, which is pretty sweet actually, and you can definitely increase the volume box to make it even larger, and then you can create this, I don't know, some misty, foggy environment or something. And obviously you can plug in a map inside the density. Let's just show you that quickly. If you go to the volume and the density, which is now, remember it's 0.1, 0.01. So if I assign a noise pattern to that, AI noise out color goes into density, there it is. And now let's change the scale directly to 0.01. And let's see what we get if I save render. Yeah, that's expected so far. So how does this volume look? Maybe I went too crazy now. You never know. Or it's not working. Oh no, there is something. Okay, let's just change the values to be 0 and maybe 0.1. Yeah, there we go. So it is working. You can see that there is something happening now in the volume. You can see those textures there. And you can add some breakup or whatever. And you can see now, if I remove the isolate, you can see in the volume itself, you can see there's now some cloud pattern or something in there, just to make it a bit more interesting. And you obviously can animate that. So I'm now changing the time, and you can see what's going on here. Is there a way to get the emission channel out of the transmission? Wait, transmission, like if you got a light bulb and want to have the emission from the glow. I don't really follow. I'm not so sure what you mean by that. Okay, so one last thing which is very interesting with those volumes, which I show you now, is to use those volume shaders to create like thick, dense, kind of subsurface objects. So let's say I've got this sphere, which is, let's say this is a a fruit, a grape. Let's say this is a grape, right? And I will assign or enable these volume stuff again in the volume attributes. And I increase the step size to 3 maybe. And I assign the same volume shader to this. Like this. And let's render this and see what we get. Nothing, because we don't have a single light. So let's try again. Okay, so this is what I guess is expected because I reduced the volume quite a bit. So going back to the shader and bringing up the volume, the density of this guy. Okay, something like this. Let's just for now remove the noise. Okay. And the cool thing now is you can actually just duplicate this guy and remove the volume stuff from this now. So there's no volume, and I will assign a new shader, standard surface shader, on top of that. So we've got two shaders on top of each other, right? So render, and now we just see the sphere, which is correct. So let's say I want to create a kind of plasticky, or let's say we make a grape. Okay, so let's just change the color a bit to resemble a grape, something like red, more red, purple, something like that. And let's reduce this guy. This map is so shiny, my HDR map is crazy. So the cool thing now is you can actually use transmission. So if I make this translucent and I switched this guy to be opaque, like opaque off, and then you can see the volume through that, right? So far not that interesting, but you can, if you select the volume now, you can change the color of that. Let's say we want this red too. And now you have a, well, obviously it needs more work than this, but you can see the fact is this now, instead of using subsurface scattering or a refraction color, you can use a volume to create like physical depth in objects. So you can actually have a pretty nice textured pattern in there, and you can create proper volume scattering inside a surface, especially for grapes or like some berries or whatever. This is a very interesting effect to create realism. So if I reduce the density now, you can actually see through this guy now. And let's just remove the spec a bit. Let's just reduce the amount. Where is that? This guy. Roughness is there. So there's no roughness anymore. So now you can actually see through this whole thing. And it's pretty interesting, I guess. And now this is just a basic see-through surface. And you can see the effect which it has. And instead of using the sky dome, let's just use the area light, which is more directional. Where is the direction of light? From here. And you can see now, it's pretty cool. Okay, so I'm almost at the end of the session. I'll just go through a few more questions. Oh, yeah. So that's a big problem. If you see through a refraction, the AUVs are like combined, and it's very hard to extract separate channels from refraction. And there was the option to transmit AUVs, but I'm not sure if that is currently supported in Arnold in the standard shader. I don't think so. What we did, how did we do this? It's a good question. I'm not actually so sure how it works. We mostly try not to do that, obviously, and in most cases it is, we never render a full shot through like a light bulb. But what you can do, you can export the displacement, like the refraction displacement. If there's something like that happening, you can just render the light bulb, and behind that you have a UV plane, and you can actually see the refraction, like how the glass distorts the UV map, and then use that this UV map in Nuke or whatever on your compositing tool to pre or after, like post distort your renderings with that UV map from the light bulb. So that's something what you can do, which is a very good effect. So you render the UV map separately, and then you render your scene without the light bulb. And then in Nuke, you apply the refraction distortion onto the rendered result. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, so feel free to ask a few more questions. I'm about to go offline again, so I'm following the comments. Let me know if you have anything. Would it be possible to see the displacement settings you put into your skin shader tutorial? I've seen a where skin pores are becoming too large to displace. Well, I won't be opening the C now, but honestly, it's nothing. Like displacement shaders are very simple to set up. I'll just do a quick demo how I kind of set it up. So clearing everything, standard shader, and then displacement shader. Delete the shading engine, connect the displacement shader output to the displacement shader in the shading engine, and then assign whatever texture you want to use. Put this guy into your displacement slot, and that is kind of the setup. And then important, depending on how your displacement is created in the Arnold tab, make sure these, in most cases, it's 0.5, which means a gray value of 0.5 has no displacement. A value of 0.6789 has a positive extrusion, and a value below 0.5 has a negative extrusion. So this is how you create the pores. That is important. And auto bump is a feature which generates a normal map from the displacement map, so you don't need so many subdivisions to create the same effect. So this is optional. You can toggle these guys. And this is the settings I used. My machine is a laptop. I'm just reading the last questions about the resolution. Yeah, these are pretty crazy values, like 86,000 pixels. That's crazy, man. The highest we have used in production, I think, was 16K, but it's lots of UDIMs, right? So if we have a huge asset, like very big, like twice the Earth or something, we have about like 400 UDIM tiles, a 16K, so it's going very crazy. But it gets heavy and your machine load is intense. So if you want to use 28K, it's crazy. I would suggest rather use 4K maps and use lots of UDIM tiles. Yeah, it doesn't matter if the map is red, blue, or green. Just use one grayscale channel. The more CPUs, the faster, obviously. Any particular setting to maintain the surface in the original position? I think I know what you mean. You mean if you have a big displacement, the viewport surface is in the origin, but then the result, the displaced result, is somewhere on top, right? That's the question. I don't know. It would be nice if there is a solution. Let me know, because sometimes it's helpful for me too. It's mostly then you just position it using the viewport. Or important is that you have the 0 value in the center, and then I think that's in most cases the problem. If your 0 value is not 1, is not 0.5, it's either 0 or 1, your mesh gets offset up and down. So it's important to have the 0 value to 0.5, so the no displacement region is in the center. But I have one more gadget I guess I can show you. If you have a plane like this, and you have, let's say, a fairly good subdivision on this, Well, let's go with 100. Like this. And you can actually... It's actually, you can actually use a texture displacement in the viewport, which is helpful in some cases. So let's see if I can find this. Here, there it is. So it's under deform, and then it's under texture. And then you can plug in a texture right here, and this would be ideally your displacement map. And this is now a proper displacement in the viewport. So you have the strength to control it somewhere here. So this might help in some cases. Hi, Boya, nice that you're showing up here as well. Thank you. So that is kind of it. So this will help you, especially if you need to position things, like if you have a sphere or whatever, you can quickly know when something is in the air or not, so you can like position this better. And it's hard to see if it's just a flat plane, right? So I don't know, got 5 more minutes, so any questions, feel free to ask them. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, I'm using MtoA 2.0.1, which is the latest release, which was released, I think, a few days back, 3 or 4 days back. Keep updating your Arnold versions. It's always nice because you get new features and bug fixes, which is always good, right? So if let's see if I missed something. Strength, I talked about that. I talked about these guys. There's a new code, talked about this. Well, yeah, I did not talk about this, but in previous versions, the Skydome actually was contributing to the indirect only. So they switched it back to be the race is now in the direct diffuse race, the Skydome light. But you can switch it back if you click this AOV indirect, and it goes back to the indirects. Yeah. Some comments on aces. Well, it's different color profiles. I have not been using them so far, so I'm not like very good in color profiles. I mostly work in sRGB or Rec 709. Aces, I have not touched them yet. In production, everything is set up for you, so just to make sure that artists don't mess around with these settings. And the companies I worked so far, all these color profile things are locked, like OCIO profiles are locked, so the artist doesn't have any control with that. So I can't really talk about that too much. Yeah. That's a good question, yeah. Yes, I always slapcom my shots. That's a must do, and it's a good habit to do that as well. So if I have my shots, I always do a slapcom with some if I have different utility AOVs, I also do a slapcom of that. So I will let's say I've got a separate PLO, which is a per light AOV, and I comp this on top. I'm just changing the value so the comp actually sees what I was trying to do with those passes. So when they start compositing, they will open my slap comp just to see what I did, and then they work on top of that. And the good thing is to having slap comps is if you're in a review session, you can always tell the supervisor, whoever, hey, please have a look at my slap comp because that's a raw rendering, and then you can actually differentiate what the comper did and what you did, and just to see the balance, how much work went into that. What is slap comping the shots? Slap comping means just A over B, really simple as slap on top of a previous layer. So, and the last question was, what was that? Yeah, well, you can put it in spec weight or spec color. If it's a grayscale map, it doesn't really matter where you plug it in. But if you have a spec color map, you would obviously plug it in the color because the way it just supports float. So that's the other thing. Okay. So 1 last minute. Shoot those questions out. What is that? Encoding images. Can you give a link for that texture? What is the light mix option? Yeah, why don't you do that? The AOV's ID, like you do in object ID pass, you can easily do that. Okay, links are blocked, so interesting. Let's see if I can find it then. Where was that? Solid angle. I will never find this like this, I guess. Well, you can easily create a object ID pass by either using the utility shader, or you just use the AOV, which is actually pre-existing. If you go to render settings, AOVs built in, there is a object ID pass somewhere. I think it's just ID now. I guess so. And this should be rendering all the IDs. There you go. That's an object ID pass, which you can use. You can also use, if you wanted to be able to more customize it, you can create a utility shader, and then you just switch this guy to be on object, and that is kind of the same effect. So if you want to customize this, you can use this guy. But at some point, I think Jonah Friedman will create this crypto mat shader very soon, and then we should have that one working as well. And when in Nuke, how do I convert the channel selection? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Anyways, so let's just try to open. Let's try open to see if I can open this link. And this will be the last question, so I'll just open the link and then we see what we get there. Support dot solid angle. I'm not sure when the last time was when I typed in an URL display. That's now crazy. So /A5 AF 3D SUG. Let's see if I misspelled. No. Okay, so I think they are porting CryptoMat to the new Surface. Oh yeah, that's great. If they will port it, boy, then it's I think because most of the people are concerned that they want to use AL Surface just to get the CryptoMat back. So I hope it will be implemented soon. Light mixes it keep the path of every light tweak intensity. Oh, a light mix like in Maxwell. Well, you can export each light separately and you can mix them yourself. So you can create light trace sets. Each light has its own trace set, and then it renders into AOVs, and you have a per light AOV, like a PLO, and you can just comp them in Nuke. Like you can add the mix, you can mix them yourself. But I don't think there will ever be something like in Maxwell where you can do this in the render view directly. I don't think so. So here was the questions about something. Let me just scroll up a bit. Could you show us a little workflow how to make a simple 2D pattern like that encoding images? I don't see a pattern there. Marienkarpfen. What do you mean? What texture is here? Oh, so I need to scroll down. Okay, coding. Golden. Oh, this one. I'm not sure if that is procedurally done. I guess you mean this one, right? No, I guess this is a texture, right? And just projected on. Thank you. Please, can you talk about the vector displacement from ZBrush? Well, it's a bit tricky to export vector displacement maps because you need to have a certain value. I'm not sure the values now, but I can try to find a tutorial for that. Can you make a workflow for such things? I don't know. It seems to be more texture-based rather than procedurally set up. So I don't think so. Okay, thank you guys. This was the last question. I went over a bit, so thank you guys for tuning in. And there will be a new tutorial on Monday, which will be about part 2 of the Substance Designer thing. And I will be recording the Arnold integration of Substance Designer soon, and there will be a fur tutorial coming soon, and a Quixel Megascans tutorials as well. So a few tutorials are coming up because I'm on holiday soon for 2 weeks, so I'm trying to record all this stuff and keep pushing them out when I'm off. So thank you guys again, and have a good Sunday still, and a good start in the week. Thank you guys.